We will get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie San Andres. I am the CFP Interim Strategic Co-Director alongside Kate Williams and also the Building Power and Impact Manager at CFE. And we are very excited today to welcome you to CFE's Pesticide and Agroecology Webinar. The purpose of today and this webinar is to discuss the intersection between pesticides and cancer, but also uplift the agroecology, land stewardship, and environmental justice work that BIPOC farmers and worker-owned cooperatives are doing to address pesticides and cancer, but really transform our food system and shift us away from an extractive model towards one that's regenerative. Specifically, our panelists will briefly discuss not just the impacts that pesticides have had on their communities, but also and farm workers' health in Central California. But we're going to dive into a panel discussion about the ways that agroecology addresses these issues, and specifically the role and importance of community land trust and worker co-ops as well. At the end, we will be sharing some resources and a few calls to action. And we will briefly close with a brief Q&A in case there are any questions that folks may have. Please feel free to utilize the chat for any comments or questions, and we want to engage with you and for you to engage with our panelists. Our facilitator and moderator today will be Kareem Scales, who is a development manager at the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, and will introduce himself shortly. But before then, we will be transitioning now to Gabriela, so with a land acknowledgement, because we don't just want to acknowledge, the reality, of land loss as a consequence of colonialism, but we really want to, as we dive into this conversation around land justice and agroecology, that, we want to pay respect to this effort of returning land to those that it has been wrongfully taken from. So pass it to you, Gabby.
Thank you. We are on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, and we want to pay tribute to the Wukchumni tribe present today. We recognize their ongoing relationship to the land, their knowledge, and continuing contributions to the life and vibrancy of the Central Valley. We also recognize the history of colonialism, forced removals, and genocide that have impacted Indigenous communities and their ongoing struggles for justice and self-determination. As non-Indigenous people, we commit to supporting their efforts to reclaim their land, culture, and sovereignty.
Thank you. Pass it to you, Kareem.
And thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Gabby, as well. And good afternoon, everyone. So excited to be the moderator of this dynamic panel today. I'm Kareem Scales. I am one of the Building Power Node co-leaders for Cancer and Free Economy Network, but also I'm a community organizer here out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I do community organizing work in the environmental justice space. And so excited to be here and learn from our dynamic panelists. And so with that said, enough about me. Well, I know we have limited time, and so I want to introduce our panelists and share a little bit about who you'll be hearing from today. So our first panelist is Yaynicut Franco, and she serves as the vice chairperson of the Wukchumni Council of Visalia, California. She comes from a long line of Wukchumni, Yalumni, and Tachi Yokich women, and she continues to lead in her community in the role as the Director of Culture and Land Stewardship for the Wukchumni tribe. Yaynicut is a cultural practitioner and ceremonial leader that dedicates her time to preserving and revitalizing traditional lifeways, language, and traditional ecological knowledge of the Wukchumni Yokich by bringing elders, youth, and adults together for storytelling, land stewarding, and ceremonies through these sessions. Also a board chairperson of Quaker Oaks Farm and board member for Food Link for Tulare County. So excited to have Yaynicut with us today. In addition, we have Rosalba Lopez Ramirez. Rosalba was raised on unceded Yokich territory with roots in Oaxaca, and she's been employed food and plant medicine to connect with BIPOC communities. Her food justice perspective is shaped by her upbringing in rural Central California and her experience in urban and land stewardship and also youth development in New York City, where she engaged Black and Brown communities through food and medicine for community building. She also co-founded Black Zocalo, which is an educational co-op honoring Black and Indigenous wisdom, and holds a Master of Science in Community Development from UC Davis. And last but not least,
I think the interpreter is asking to slow down just a little bit.
oh, sorry. Okay, my apologies. Thank you. Last but not least, we have Nayamin Martinez. Nayamin is the director of the Central California Environmental Justice Network. Ms. Martinez has vast experience working with immigrants and residents of disadvantaged communities across the San Joaquin Valley, managing public health programs, conducting participatory research, and launching leadership and civic engagement programs. Ms. Martinez also holds a master's degree in both public health and sociology. And with that said, please welcome all of our panelists today. And so I'm excited to be moderating this panel. Lots to learn here as it relates to pesticides and agroecology. And so with that said, why don't we just dive right into some of the questions? And so our first question is related to agroecology as a solution. But I think before we can get into the solutions, we need to really address how these issues even came about. So the first question I would ask is, how have pesticides impacted your communities? And also, what solutions are you working on to address the issues of pesticides / cancer? And how does that speak to alternatives to industrial agriculture? And so, Nayamin, would you like to tackle that first?
Absolutely. Buenas tardes. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be sharing this space with you. Well, it is very, could be depressing to talk about pesticides in the place where we live, where both Yaynicut and Rosalba and I live, because this is like is like the inside the beast. We are the people that are being exposed by the majority of the pesticides that are applied in the state of California. Over 200 million pounds of pesticides are applied every year in our state, and more than 60% of them are applied in the counties where we live, Madera, Fresno, and Tulare counties. And that, of course, is having a toll in the health, not only of the farm workers that are laboring these fields, but also in the lives of thousands of immigrants, and for the most part, immigrants who live near these fields. Because it's not only a situation of who is working the land, but also who's living, who's going to the schools next to these fields. So what CCJ, the organization that I preside, has been doing for 20 years is fighting pesticides, joining coalitions to put rules so that we can phase out pesticides such as chlorpyrifos that is deemed to cause cancer in our children. We have had successes in policies that are more protective, but that's not enough because we felt that we were like in a treadmill. We were fighting one pesticide, they were already registering 10 more. And this was going to be an endless game. So that's when our focus, we continue fighting for pesticides and for protections, but most so, sorry, I'm getting excited and I go very fast. My apologies to the interpreters. So what we can do in addition to advocate against pesticides use is show people what to do. And that I think that's the common denominator of the projects that you will be listening from Yaynicut, Rosalba, and myself. We have been showing that we want to grow food, but we don't have to depend on these extractive methods that rely on pesticides and chemicals as fertilizers. Chemicals that are polluting our water and air, and that they are depleting the health of our soil. So what we are showing through our respective projects is alternative ways of growing food using sustainable methods and giving land back to the hands that are really laboring those fields. So our farm workers are not tending the farms of billionaire corporations that are just extracting their wealth and contaminating our resources. So I think that pesticides have continued to be a burden for our air, our water, our soil. And what we are doing through our demonstration projects is showing alternatives to these extractive methods. So I'll keep it there because I know that Yaynicut and Rosalba had a lot to share.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosalba, pronouns are she and her or ella, and I'm here on unceded Yokuts land, or Madera. And I wanted to share kind of like a personal kind of perspective, because my family is originally from the state of Oaxaca. Our community, particularly the Mixtec community, the New Savvy community, we tend to operate in networks. And so while this is a personal story, also realizing that there are similar threads within our community, within my community. And so what brought me, and so I want to start there because we have been here visiting, we're visitors on this on unceded land. And but before we came here, we have about 2 generations deeply entrenched in pesticides, unfortunately. And we also have a millennia of being able to steward the land without pesticides. So I want to be clear about that. But because we are having this conversation about pesticides, I would acknowledge that when my father came to this country, he labored in industrial agriculture in Mexico and states like Sinaloa, Veracruz, where industrial agriculture was how he survived, how he put food on the table for his siblings. And that's a thread that continues here when he came here in 1974 in California, working in industrial agriculture. And as you know, working in grapes and strawberries and some of the heaviest forms of agriculture where pesticides are heavily used on these and continue to be used. And today, and my mother also along in the 80s joined him and was a farm worker. And I was conceived here in California as my mother labored in the strawberry fields of Oxnard, California. And to me, so I, even before being conceived, I was already being exposed to these pesticides at a really early age. And I labored as well as a child, and you know, I grew up here in the Central Valley. So my exposure to pesticides, unfortunately, it goes a long way. So we have two generations, and sometimes there's a lot of questions for me as to how we don't always understand. As Nayamin mentioned, like there's always a new pesticide that's being introduced, right? So one is banned and the next one comes, right? And so I think in that vein, like we are trying to address that, right? And on a personal level, like I see, I have two boys, and you know, they both have disabilities, and sometimes I question, we don't know. You know, a few years back in college, I was doing research with UCLA on Parkinson's disease, and there was research showing that folks who live, not only farm workers, but also people who just lived in the Central Valley were being impacted by pesticides. So, and you know, I was driving around throughout the valley and doing this research, thinking about just the water, right? Like we were asking questions like, well, what is your source of water? Like we all need water. We all live, like to this day, I do not drink water from my faucet. I'll take a shower with it, but I do not drink water from here, even though I live in a city, but I grew up drinking groundwater. So that is the reality that we are literally paying for that. Like, so that's just, and not everyone has that ability to pay $2.50 for a 5-gallon 5 gallons of water, that will last maybe a few days, right? A day or two for a family of 4. So I'm in some ways privileged now, but I didn't always have the privilege. I did not grew up drinking water that we paid for. It was what was there. And so I wanted to share that personal narrative because it really kind of has shifted my thinking about we need to be able to steward land in a better way. And that is really what Black Zocalo is doing. And part of that is like decolonizing our relationship with land. So I'll leave it there and I'll share more about what the work that Black Zocalo is doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Rosalba. Nayamin, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna show, if I'm able to, 2 slides, I promise, so that we can see some statistics that are, so you don't have to take my word for it. So these are numbers that come from the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And these were like numbers that are, you're gonna say they're outdated. Well, DPR, this agency, oftentimes don't give us information super updated. It's always 3 years behind. So, but just, it hasn't decreased. It's over 200 million pounds of pesticides applied every single year. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the pie chart is the counties that use it the most. So Fresno, Kern, Madera, Kings as the top users. And I also want to bringing it back to the stories that Rosalba was sharing about growing up in this situation. As Rosalba sadly is not alone when in her upbringing. This is the reality of thousands of children in the San Joaquin Valley. And again, I'm quoting scientific sources so that, sometimes we're told like, oh, it's just what you are saying. No, this is a study done by the California Environmental Health Tracking Program in which they were studying exposure of children. That means children that attend schools that are within a 1/4 mile of a field where a pesticide is applied. And for Fresno County, that number is 131 schools. In Tulare County, they have the highest percentage of schools in that proximity. Over 63% of the schools in Tulare County fall within that range. And who goes to those schools? Not white rich people. It's our kids. Our brown, our indigenous, our native kids are the ones attending these schools and are the ones therefore more vulnerable to the exposure of these chemicals that are poisoning and stopping the development of their lungs, their brains, and impacting our health all along. So just wanted to add this, but please, Yaynicut, feel free to add.
Yeah, so Hede and Shishiboto na Hateleta Eka Kamoy Witao. I just said that good afternoon, and I'm happy to see you all today. So I'm Yaynicut Franco. I am a descendant from a lot of the Yaynicut communities here in the Central Valley. Pre-colonization, the Central Valley, or all of California, but the Central Valley was it was a very beautiful place. It was very lush. It was rich in water and fish, animals. And it was a very pristine place that was tended to for many generations by our people. So our Inyana people, our Yaynicut people, have been so affected by big agriculture, colonization. I will say that once the gold rush had happened, and there were land grabs here in the Central Valley, as well as 18 unratified treaties by the United States government. Those things caused a lot of push out and relocation of our people. Here in the Central Valley, there's only one federally recognized tribe on the valley floor, and that's intentional. That tribe is the Tachiyokuts, which are located kind of in the desert in the middle of nowhere. So what I would like to share is when the push out and relocations happened, that's when a lot of these big farms, these multi-million-dollar or multi-billion-dollar industry came in and took our natural resources, pushed our people out. It forced many of our people, because we could no longer hunt and gather fish, we could no longer provide for our families the way we always had for generations. We had to then become farm laborers. So a lot of Yaynicut people ended up working on these farms. My maternal grandfather was a Filipino man who migrated here. And so a lot of Filipino communities as well, came over here for farm work. So my family, personally, we have been, affected by pesticides from working in the fields, as a way of survival, and then cancers. And so one of the things that happened with my grandfather is he ended up passing from cancer. Many of his other Filipino and Native friends that worked the fields also passed away from cancers, that we feel were directly related to the pesticides that they were exposed to for many, many years. These pesticides then, seeped into our waterways, and like Nayamin said, pretty much destroyed our soils. And so now what we're trying to do is get back to sharing how our people have always stewarded this land in a healthy way, in a in a way that we're working with the land, we're working with the animals, and we're working with each other, because we realize that it's going to take other people, especially other people with like minds, to adopt these ways of regenerative agriculture or traditional ecological knowledge practices into what they're doing, in order for us to change how the Central Valley is currently farmed and managed. We want clean water, clean air, clean soil for our future generations. And so it really takes, what we're doing now, who we're partnering with now. We have to make those changes now so that our future generations have those things. So for the Wukchumni tribe, we realized that we needed to partner with other people that are out there doing the work. So Nayamin is one of our favorite partners, because she works throughout the Central Valley with all of these communities that have been directly impacted by these environmental issues. And so we have created a Central Valley Agroecology Network, where we work together with FoodLink for Tulare County, which is a food bank. We focus on permaculture, we focus on traditional ecological knowledge, and working directly with the communities. Because that's the other thing that's really important. We can't just be organizations that work internally. We have to be out there working with the people, and getting their input. Because again, it's going to take all of us to create change. I also work with Rosalba. Together, we have kind of joined this BIPOC agroecology network throughout California, with many projects and important work that's being done throughout the different regions, in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area, and then in the Central Valley. So we recognize that it takes a lot of us in all these different regions, and we're really coming together, creating community, creating trust, and figuring out a way how we can make this world better for our future generations. So that's just a little bit about what we do, and I'll go and stop there.
Thank you so much, Yaynicut, Rosalba, and Nayamin, for all those great points. A couple recurring themes that came up as I was listening to you all speak. And the first one, when you look at these issues, although every community's issues are different, one thing that continues to present itself is that it's always about our proximity, right? And so in this scenario, it's the proximity to pesticides. In other communities, it may be the proximity to the highway system, or proximity to industrial facilities. And so we see this, although different, the same story across communities across the country. And so that was one thing that stood out. Also, I really like the collaborative model that you all are using, right? And so there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. If there are organizations who are already invested in doing the work, how do we come together and support that? And lastly, one of the things that really stood out was that you all are looking at this from, what are the proactive measures that we can take, right? Too often, I think we're in these situations, we're being reactive and what I like to call using the Band-Aid approach. But you all are addressing these from a proactive lens, and I think that's extremely important. So a lot to unpack there. I want to transition to the next question. And so this next question is about land justice and economic justice. And so we'll start with Rosalba, and it's a two-part question. If you could speak to the role of worker-owned co-ops, community land trusts, or land justice, and what role does that play in building solutions toward a regenerative agriculture and economy?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. Yeah, so here, as I mentioned, I'm part of Black Zocalo. Black Zocalo is in the stages of forming as a worker-owned co-op. That has always been the vision. And I think that Black Zocalo kind of speaks to a lot of, what is happening kind of nationally, and also like, more locally, of folks coming together and saying like, hey, like we can't do this alone, like. And in that spirit, and also in the spirit of like, I think worker-owned co-ops are kind of been reimagined, I think. And there's folks who have definitely paved the ground on worker-owned co-ops. Fannie Lou Hamer in the South of the United States. So like Black communities have been, very central to laying that out in this kind of capitalist system that we live in. But also like, cooperation has been something that has been part of our culture. And I say this, as somebody in my family, in the Mixtec community, we have something called tequio, right? We're doing something for the well-being of the community, and this is a service or cargo. This is a responsibility. So Black Zocalo, it is a co-op, and I think it's recognizing that we live looking back and looking at our communities because it resonates, and also looking at like, hey, we also need to provide for ourselves, right? And I think unfortunately so much of the work that folks do on the ground, that being like the land-based work, right? We have folks who are the farmers, really, like they're the ones who are out there waking up at 4 a.m. And stewarding the land, and yet they're not the ones who are not reaping the benefits, right? We're at the bottom as folks who have been farm workers were exploited. And so I think this is really about how do we kind of care for the folks who are doing the work in this reality of capitalism. And so that's kind of where Black Zocalo kind of formed itself, and also looking at like, how do we also elevate the knowledge of Black Indigenous folks in land stewardship work, right? Because so much of there's so much hype around like, well, this is like sustainable agriculture is something new and hip, and no, it's like we've been doing this. And I think we are in the point too where and we'll get to this a little bit more, but access to capital is really challenging as Black and Indigenous folks. And so what can we do for the moment? And I think so much of what we are doing right now as a cooperative is to looking at reframing our relationship with land, right? Unfortunately, there has been the way I was informed about, being a farm worker was like, this is decent work, but this is not where we want you because of how exploitative in nature it is. So like, let's move you away from this, right? And not realizing that the harm wasn't really the land, it was really it was the folks who were telling us to do it this way, right? Like this is, and so, so I think that we are in a point where we are, looking to work collectively rather than I would say, I'm trying to find a nice word for white landowners to tell us how to be in relationship with land. We're shifting that relationship with land and with one another. So we're making collective decisions, and also knowing that our relationship with land also impacts the relationship that our community has with land, right? So if we see land as is no longer a commodity, but something that it's a beneficial relationship between the land and the people. And I think that is kind of, we're still in the forming stages of Black Zocalo, so we are doing that work as educators for the time being, and we are doing, we steward land in the little bit of land that we do have, right? So we're doing work in schools, so we're working with charter schools or whoever wants to reach out to us, and we're trying to reframe the history that we have with land, with young children. We're going into community spaces where we're having people share their stories. And so like I think if folks have the capacity to really be vulnerable, we can see the land has never been the thing that pulls us down, but really it's the system that has been pulling the capitalist system that has been exploiting us. And so I think there's a lot of work to do around healing our relationship with land, and I think that organizations like Black Zocalo are kind of paving the way and acknowledging that there's harm and that there's a lot of work to do to heal. So I'll pass it on to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosalba. Rewriting the narrative, right, and taking the power into your own hands through community-led solutions. I love it. I want to transition over and see if would you like to tackle that, Yaynicut? I know that you have some experience as a board member with the Community Land Trust Network, and so would you like to kind of expound on that question?
Sure. So I was just recently added as a board member for the California Community Land Trust Network. The Wukchumni tribe is currently in the process of creating a community land trust. When we first heard about this model of creating a place-based community that can address housing or can create housing for community members, green spaces, gardens, all working collaboratively together, also creating like work around co-ops. When we heard about that model, we were like, that's what our people have always done. We've always worked together to take care of the village, to take care of one another, to work in relationship with the land, our plant relatives, our bird and animal relatives, and then our human relatives. So the concept and idea of this community land trust was kind of a no-brainer, and we're like, okay, well, that's where we're working towards. So currently we are working towards creating community land trust that's going to address the housing needs of our tribal elders, and we recognize that it's important for us to take care of the elders because those are the ones with the most lived experience. Those are our wisdom, our language keepers, and so it's really important for us to do that, as well as create housing and then being a model for others. So in the Central Valley, there are 2 community land trusts in Fresno, but we realize through the work, through our networks with Nayamin and FoodLink and other small BIPOC farms and organizations, that housing is a real need for all of our people's communities. So what we're trying to do is, again, be a model with our agroecology network. Again, it made sense for us to move in that direction and find these like-minded organizations and individuals that understood that our relationship with the land and how we care for it was really important, and how what we put into the land directly comes back to us, into what we eat, what we drink, how we feel, our health. And so it was really important for us to make sure that people understand our history, and that this is how our people have always thought about how, like, our place in the world, our relationship with the world around us, and that how, again, like I said earlier, how we can think about our future generations and what we're doing now, how we can make it better for the future. So for us, it's really important. I know sometimes people are like, you're on what board and how does that work to address the needs of the Wukchumni people? And we have been really strategic because the land trust is going to help us with housing. It's going to help us address some of the needs. Our agroecology networks, we're working with Nayamin, who's boots on the ground, addressing some of these environmental justice issues and advocating for the people of the Central Valley, and then just creating more relationships with other individuals that also believe in taking care of the land. So I'll go and stop there. Maybe Nayamin has something to add.
Sure. Well, we're trying to follow in their steps. We do not have a co-op yet or a community land trust, but we want to have both. So what we learned is that the big desire of a lot of our farm workers is to be able to own land, to have a piece of land where, I mean, let's even take a step back, not even own, at least have access for now. Where can we grow our own food so that we know how pesticides are bad, but we cannot afford going and buying, organic vegetables from the store because they are very expensive. So one of the dreams that they have had is to grow their own food and their own plants and their own everything. And we were able to do that, started to do that last year when we formed our demonstration farm, La Milpa de Fresno. It's 1.5 acres in land that we are being able to use at no cost. We don't own it. It's a part of a church that has a big property and that thought that it was a good part of their mission to help not only farm workers, but also some of their African-American members to have access to this land. And that's how we established the Milpa de Fresno. We just have our first harvest last fall. So don't be impressed. They are not like massive numbers, but in just 3 months, they harvest 315 pounds of vegetables, cilantro, papalo, chepil, corn, cempasúchil flowers. So what these pictures that I'm sharing here is what they grow. And it was not absent of challenges. We also have pests. We have aphids, we have gophers, but we didn't go and just try to find the closest Home Depot to buy random. We deal with it in the way that, Native Americans and others who have learned how to tend the land carefully have shown us. So here are some of our participants, even the gopher that was, a guest in our farm, and they were so happy because they want to have that access to these fresh vegetables that are grown with their hands, that they don't have any chemicals, and that they don't have to be struggling because they cannot afford buying these things in the store. However, this is a borrowed land, so that the hope is that at some point we could have a community land trust, we could own land, and we could establish a co-op where they are going to be co-owners and they could run their own farm and do this in the way that they want it to be, rather than working for a major ag company that don't see them as human beings. They just see them as, some like a little machine that they can explode, and it doesn't matter if it's too hot, it doesn't matter if there's a wildfire, it doesn't matter anything. You are there to generate profit for that company even at the cost of your own health. And that's the cycle that we want to end. So we hope to have a land trust and we hope to have a co-op, but for now we have the Milpa.
Yes, let's manifest and speak that into existence. And so love everything that you all shared. Access was something that really stood out. I think as you mentioned, Yaynicut, about sitting at those tables, right? That sometimes others may not feel is the best course of action, right? But sometimes in order to influence change, you have to kind of be strategic. And so definitely can relate to that. And so much to unpack there. But want to transition to our last question. And so with that said, the last question is going to be very fitting to the building power node. And before I do that, really quick, I want to recognize in the chat my amazing building power co-leader, Ms. Katura Butler Reed, has shared some resources about community land trust in the chat. And so please check out those links and if you want to learn more about community land trust. But back to the last question, building power, right? And so bringing this back full circle, as we're looking to identify in what ways can we build power with community-based organizations who are on the ground doing this work. And I think one of the best ways to identify, where can we grow is by understanding where are the gaps. And so this next question is just that. What gaps have shown up in this work? And the second part of the question is, what impact can we in community have in creating this change? What are some things that we can do to help support your work or just help and influence this change? And I want to start this one off, if I could, with Nayamin.
Thank you. I think that when you said the word power, that's what we need. We need to build power together because as I said at the beginning of my presentation, it feels sometimes very difficult to make changes in a place where you are the minority, where you are seen down, where you are called, you think that we are powerless, but in reality we have a lot of power, and we're making that by showing these demonstration projects. What support we need is maybe amplify our voices so that they see that the Fresno County, Madera County, Tulare County is not only the house of these big ag companies, but this is the home of our communities, and that they are trying to not doing better for themselves. And that if we would have, for instance, access to land, we could have been doing much better. So why are we having to wait for decades to bring land back to our communities when that's something that together we can do? There's a lot of resources out there that are offering support. Both Yaynicut and I had the privilege of traveling to other places of California where we were learning about other projects, and they would always say, oh, these angels that help us, and we're like, where are our angels? And we do have our share of angels, but not enough to go and buy, land that is sold in the millions of dollars. So how well we can elevate our voices and come together, share about these best practices, and also demand that the government start investing in these things so that they don't continue to pour money to the big farmers, to just the corporations, but actually to the people. Like, we should see federal dollars, state dollars, philanthropy dollars put into supporting these projects. And there has been already organizations at least here in California, such as the California Endowment, that have been make some of our projects possible. But they cannot be alone. This has to be an effort that has much more repercussion at all levels, at the state, but also the national levels.
Thanks, Nayamin. And Rosalba, did you want to reflect on that question again? What gaps have shown up in this work, and what impact can we have? How can we help move this work forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just echo a lot of what Nayamin said. I think that something that has been inspiring for me is to see in the state of New York, and seeing how different groups, right? And people like Karen Washington have been very vocal about pushing having a network of folks to work together to then get the state to give money to in their case is for a Black farmer fund, right? So that those funds are then being given out, and it's not just trickles of money. It's like a good, comfortable amount of money, of millions of dollars that are supporting the next generation of Black farmers. And I see California as being, it would only make sense to have this, for us to be the ones doing that too, if not on a national level, I think at least on the state level, to support BIPOC farmers to have a similar fund. And I think of networks like the BIPOC Agroecology Network as having that potential leverage to do that, since we're across the state. I mean, we're so in the forming phase, but I do, I think in the next decade, hopefully sooner, but like in the next decade, that is definitely within grasp. And yeah, I would be, happy to see like, my own, boys and family members to be able to tap into that. And I would say that, and then also with that being said, I also note that we are not a nonprofit, and I think that is sometimes a struggle, right? We're forming a worker-owned co-op with the support. Right now we have UC Berkeley law students who are supporting us with creating that structure. However, and so there is also there's funding that is only available sometimes to nonprofits, and we've been fortunate enough to have the Wukchumni tribe like support us with physical sponsorship. And then there's also like, even with not being a nonprofit, there's so many receipts, so much like, a nonprofit has to be really in a comfortable place. Otherwise, like to pay people, like it is so hard just because if you're getting a federal grant or a state grant, it's like pulling teeth. And so you have people who are not getting paid for months or even a year. Because the nonprofit might not have those available funds. It's like that kind of reimbursable grant. So I think that I think grantors really need to have that in mind of being like, what if this is going to be an equity grant? Like, is it really equitable when I'm expecting the nonprofit or whatever group to like, give me every single receipt? So I think there is a need to be for funders to be more mindful of what is the real intention behind this, right? And to just be trusting of who they fund, right? So I would leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalba. I know we have a few minutes left. Yaynicut, I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that briefly, and then I want to make sure that we clearly present some calls to action about, how others can help support. I believe we have a few petitions that we want to share, but Yaynicut, take it from if you want to tackle that one.
Sure. I mean, I just echo everything that, Nayamin and Rosalba had shared. But for us, we are a non-federally recognized tribe, the Wukchumni people. So that means we don't have the federal acknowledgement. We don't have a land base. Essentially, we're homeless in our own homeland. So a lot of the times, us showing up or me showing up at the table in these rooms or these conversations that are, led by a lot of non-natives. It is almost an act of resistance. Like my existence is resistance, essentially, because there was, a lot of government-led and funded work that was, done, funds that were distributed to the genocide of the Wukchumni, Yaynicut Native people. And so just by being in these spaces, taking up space, that's what's going to create change. And even if it's just one, our small tribe, our voice, it's a start. And that's why the networking and making these alliances with other organizations is going to make all of our voices stronger if we're able to come together. And funding is really important to do that work, but we also know that the Wukchumni people, we believe that we are caretakers of the land. So that's our responsibility, whether there's funding or not. So I think, we just need to remember that, like, how are we showing up as stewards of the land that we're living on, even if we're not native or not, California native or, native to this country. But how are we all showing up in our spaces? How are we supporting one another, especially the work of, our BIPOC relatives, because we know that we are the ones most impacted. And like Rosalba said, funding, right? Like we have to apply for these equity grants and it's so many loops to jump through. And all we're doing is trying to get a little bit of money so we go back and help our communities. So yeah, looking at, funding, philanthropy, how can it be more equitable? How can they show up and advocate in their circles to have more funding accessible to directly to the communities, and not big health organizations that, you know, pay their CEOs first and then programs get the little remaining amounts of funding. How can it go directly to the people? And yeah, how can we
Yes.
access land? So
Yes, I echo everything that was said. Getting the resources, the funding is extremely important, but it doesn't stop there, right? What are the real sustainable solutions? And so love everything that was said. I really am just extremely grateful for being able to share space with you all. I learned a whole lot today as it relates to the topic of pesticides and agroecology. And so just want to say huge thanks to all of our panelists, Rosalba, Nayamin and Yaynicut, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and stories. And so with that said, I want to really just emphasize how you can help support. Again, in the chat, you'll see a link that Katura put in the chat where you can help sign a letter of support as it relates to Senate Bill 1448. And also, I would say support these organizations who are doing the work, whether it's through volunteering or any way that you can. And so again, thank you all for your time today.
I
Yes,
put
go
in
ahead.
the chat 3 bills that are being run right now in California, that one will go to protect children against pesticide use near schools, but also one that will be funding more programs for food, local food hubs, and climate resiliency.
Thank you so much. And again, before I transition, just want to again thank you all for your time. And I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Jamie to close us out.
Wow, thank you so much. What a phenomenal and rich conversation this was. You know, I'm taking away just so much from all of this, you know, from the beginning. Thank you for grounding ourselves and grounding this group in, you know, talking about the history of colonialism, bringing in the transition from like the land grabbing that was started, you know, with this gold rush that transitioned into these large farms, right? And yeah, so just thank you for grounding us in that. Thank you, Rosalba, for also bringing up tequio, you know, like these principles around reciprocity, right? Or Yaynicut, when, you know, you said what we put into the land, we actually get back, you know, in terms of our health and all of this. So it's really a shift in how we even understand food. It's beyond food. It's our relationship to the land and all of that. So thank you. And Nayamin, thank you as well for the incredible work that you've been doing. And then also thank you for speaking to this aspect around the resources that is needed, right? If we really want to transform our food system, if we want to transition away from this extractive capitalist model towards something that's regenerative and really truly implementing what equity looks like, then we're going to need to support this work. So Katura, shout out to the BP team, Kareem, Katura, Rosalba, Gabby, Hannah, thank you for support with tech, and Anayana as well. Please forgive me if I'm forgetting somebody, but just want to give them a shout out. Thank you to our translators. If you do want to support the organizations that you just heard, we have a resource guide that Katura is putting in the chat with not just fact sheets about like how pesticides impacts your health, but like how, you know, why is agroecology important? Why community land trust and worker co-ops? But we have to support them individually. And yes, also, you know, we want to thank Park Foundation for also sponsoring this webinar series. Stay tuned for the next one. The next month, we're going to have one where Katura will be leading. She is based out of Cancer Alley in the South, and we'll be talking about petrochemical industries and how communities are organizing to shift that industry and, you know, basically, you know, push this industry off of their lands, you know, as well. So stay tuned. And if you're interested in the work that CFE does, just going to do a brief little pitch to be transparent. CFE is actually in a financially not the best place. So we are fundraising right now, and we'd love to continue and build off of this amazing webinar series to do more. So please, by all means, visit our donate page as well if you're interested in donating and supporting this type of work and hearing more from communities. So with that said, we do have a few minutes for a Q&A, but that's only if there were questions in the chat. If we don't have any, I think we could close off. But any questions that we want to address? Anybody? Okay, it looks like there isn't. Again, thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you for being here.